It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays presented by Film Seizure. The Gill-Man is back. Some time ago, I discussed the classic Universal monster movie, Creature from the Black Lagoon. That movie was a huge hit for the studio, and in a way, it kind of helped keep the classic Universal monster cycle alive for just a little bit longer. Now, depending on who you ask, a few people may say that House of Dracula in 1945 or She-Wolf of London in 1946 marked the actual end of the cycle. A few others might say that the Abbott and Costello Meets series extended the era through the middle 50s. And while the Metaluna mutant from This Island Earth has been retroactively added to the Universal monsters, generally, I think most people would agree that the Creature from the Black Lagoon sequels marked the end of the classic era of Universal monsters before they shifted to science fiction creatures. And that's where we are this week. Revenge of the Creature was the first sequel for the old Gill-Man. Now, this movie wasn't exactly received well, but it was kind of a fun little movie and has a handful of things that kind of make the movie notable. First, this is the screen debut of Clint Eastwood. And then the film also made use of several real North Florida attractions, most notably a large portion of the film being shot at Marineland, which is just about an hour south of Jacksonville. That park opened in 1938 and claimed to be the first oceanarium that the world had ever opened. The park began kind of declining in the 1980s before a pair of hurricanes in 1999 forced the park to close for about 7 years due to the extensive damage. It's rebounded since and was eventually sold to the Georgia Aquarium, but is still running and focuses heavily on dolphin encounters, educational programs, and even conducts research on marine life care. And speaking of Jacksonville, perhaps one of the more memorable scenes in this movie in which the Gill-Man captures the blonde beauty, Helen Dobson, is filmed at what was called the Lobster House. It was a popular restaurant, but unfortunately it burned down in 1962, and it was never rebuilt. But another restaurant that is now a brewing company and a park currently exists near where the Lobster House once was. A couple of other items of note about Revenge of the Creature. The 50s were part of the golden age of 3D. Several movies came out using the gimmicky nature of that third dimension. Things coming right out at you and making you feel like you're part of the action, that sort of stuff. The first Creature of the Black Lagoon was released in 3D, and Revenge of the Creature was the only 3D sequel to a 3D film released during this period. So that's kind of an interesting little tidbit there that I didn't actually know about until I started doing research for this episode. This was another film also that starred John Agar. Now, we saw him last in Tarantula, released in the same year, and also directed by Jack Arnold. John Agar was pretty much the biggest star of horror sci-fi drive-in fare during the 50s. And aside from Revenge of the Creature and Tarantula, he starred in The Mole People, Attack of the Puppet People, Daughter of Dr. Jekyll, The Brain from Planet Eros, and Invisible Invaders. These are all movies that I could probably cover on this show. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that Revenge of the Creature was the first film featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000 when it moved from Comedy Central to Sci-Fi Channel. Sci-Fi has always been owned by Universal, therefore they had the Universal catalog at their disposal. So when they picked up MST3K, they did an 8th season that featured many of the 50s Universal films before settling back into the more normal, lower-budget indie films that they typically covered. So in this movie, American Joe Hayes is sent to the Amazon River to retrieve the elusive Gill-Man. Whether or not he's still alive is kind of questioned at the beginning. He was riddled with bullets at the end of the first film. Either way, there is sort of a possibility that he's reproduced. Hayes goes into the water despite the warnings he's been given and is, of course, attacked by the Gill-Man, who has indeed survived his wounds. Now, before being pulled back up to the boat, the creature does try to sever Hayes' airline. So in other words, this creature dude is pretty smart. They set some charges to try to stun the creature to the surface, and when the Gill-Man does rise to the surface, they are able to capture him. So the creature is in a coma and is sent to the Ocean Harbor Oceanarium to be studied. Now, this is where it was filmed at Marineland. John Agar's Professor Cleet Ferguson, what a name, huh? Well, he goes down to Florida to study the creature's behavior. Now, Cleet is an animal psychologist. There he meets Helen Dobson, played by Lori Nelson. And she is an ichthyology student, that's a hard word to say, and is going to study the Gill-Man there too. Now, if there's anything that we know about that stone-cold hunk that is John Agar, whenever he plays some kind of a science or doctor man, we know that Helen is going to be rather taken by our good professor. But that's not before a little bit of a love triangle between Helen, Joe, and Cleet begins to form. When the Gill-Man awakens from his coma, it causes a pretty big stir with the reporters assembled at the Ocean Harbor Oceanarium. Like dumbasses, though, the pool they have the creature in has a ladder that he can use to climb out of the tank. This gets people attacked, as one might expect. They eventually move the creature to its permanent tank, but they also chain his foot down to the bottom so he can't use that ladder to get out of the tank either. So what happens next? Well, Ocean Harbor puts up a life-size standee of the Gill-Man and starts selling tickets for yokels to gawk at him. And a big part of the movie concerns Cleet and Helen's study of the Gill-Man. Now, Cleet wants to teach it how to respond to commands. Basically, he and Helen are basically going to be the only ones that will feed the creature. She's to tell him stop when he gets too close, and if he doesn't immediately stop, as he is not going to do because he's a fish man and doesn't speak English, Cleet shocks him. Now, okay, I kind of feel like Cleet just kind of wants to shock the fish guy. I mean, he should have had her say, like, maybe stop in Portuguese. I mean, Gill-Man is from Brazil, after all. If he knows any human language, I would assume it would be Portuguese, but I digress. The Gill-Man starts to take a serious shine to Helen as well. He begins studying and watching her. It's actually kind of great how often there are scenes of Helen and Cleet talking in front of an observation window, and he's just chilling there back there in the window, just looking at her like he's trying to eavesdrop on their conversation. And he gets real smart about how he plans to make his move. It seems like he's learning a thing or two about stopping when she tells him to basically make her get a little bit closer to him so he can grab her. Now, all this excitement and the hormones charging through him makes it possible for him to break the chain holding him in the tank. And so he is able to escape and attacks and kills Joe and makes his way to the ocean. Now, I will give Gill-Man something. He quickly finds the place that Helen is staying at. Thanks to her dog barking at the creature when he breaks in, Cleet is able to hear it, and he goes to check on her. But they decide to basically spend their last day together with a day and night on the town. However, the Gill-Man follows because I think he just has like Helen radar or something. Anyway, he makes his move as she and Cleet are having a nice dinner and dance date at the aforementioned lobster house. And Cleet and Helen make out on the deck while the Gill-Man crawls out of the water, and he follows them into the lobster house and just whisks her away. And John Agar chases her with the Coast Guard or Coast Cops or something. But the creature goes along the coast and starts killing people that he comes across. Eventually, the Fuzz tracks down the creature and kill him while Cleet saves Helen. So let's get to my 3 things I like about Revenge of the Creature. First, frankly, it's just a pleasant movie to watch. And that's kind of a wishy-washy thing to say, ain't it? But it's a fairly laid-back movie with the backdrop of Marineland. And it's nice to see the wildlife of fish and turtles and dolphins and stuff. It's like having a fish tank of sorts. Now, hear me out on this. It used to be in fashion to have a fish tank in the waiting room of dentist offices. Why? Because people tend to be very jittery and nervous around dentists. Most fear the pain of dental work. So they started putting fish tanks in there because those are like calming to watch. This movie is calming to watch. You almost feel like you are at Marineland. Second, I positively love how it seems that John Agar's character has absolutely no interest in the Gill-Man at first. You know, the whole reason why he's there in the first place. No, the moment he sees Helen, he, like any warm-blooded macho hunk on the level of John Agar in the mid-50s would do, decides to give work the finger and try to set up a dinner date with Helen. Now, don't get me wrong, Lori Nelson is super pretty, and I might have the same thoughts when I show up at Marine Land and see her, but let's be honest, I'm only about 35% the hunk that John Agar was in 1955. Now, look, I get it. I get why Joe wants to move in on Helen. He's just an all-American adventurer who has just gotten back from capturing this creature. He's got no other thing going on. And I get why the Gill-Man wants to get in on that Helen action. I mean, he's into the ladies. I mean, he's a known Playboy fish guy. Agar's Cleet is a professor who sits around all day talking to animals. Considering he instantly wants to get that Helen in the sack, I kind of feel like he's a bit of a bullshit professor. He cares far more about taming Strange than taming the Gill-Man, but what do I know? I just love how immediately he gives up his first day of his 2-week work study to try to get laid. Now finally, the whole scene in which Gill-Man escapes and makes landfall to kidnap Helen is great. So Cleet and Helen are making out, and before he comes out of the water, they go back inside the lobster house. Then the Gill-Man just moseys on in and makes off with Helen. That's it. He just walks in like he's going to saddle up to the bar and order a martini. It's such a small scene. In the first movie, he's wrecking the boat to get to Julie Adams. Here, he just walks into a restaurant and steals a lady. It's the small things, people. It's the small things. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. Additionally, hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. You can also check out new posts at my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday. So until next week, stay spooky.